Welcome to the Purdue University Ideas Festival. I'm delighted you're here. My name is Michelle Foreman, and I am a distinguished professor and the department head of the Department of Nutrition Science in the College of Health and Human Science. Tonight, I have the privilege of introducing our special guests. This unique event, marking Purdue's 150th anniversary, celebrates giant leaps resulting from daring intellectual risk-taking of the past, present, and future, here at Purdue and throughout the world. We celebrate all those who refuse to let convention stand in the way of invention, scholars and innovators who see a barrier only as a challenge and never a reason to quit. This festival spans 4 broad topics: space exploration, artificial intelligence and the need for balance between humanity and technology, health, longevity, and quality of life, and the sustainability of our planet and economy. Tonight, we delve into the topic of health and longevity as we explore the question, what if we could engineer better health? With distinguished guests Miles O'Brien, award-winning science correspondent for PBS NewsHour, and Dr. Ali Rezai, director of the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute at West Virginia University. Dr. Rezai is a world-renowned neurosurgeon and neuroscientist who spearheads pioneering projects in engineering and health. From using micropellet implants to curb opioid addiction cravings, to utilizing focused ultrasound to treat early-stage Alzheimer's. Rezai and O'Brien also will discuss related Purdue research. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Miles O'Brien and Dr. Ali Rezai.
Thank you, Michelle. Very appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for coming out on this snowy, cold, vortex night. We're glad you're here. Is it snowing bad out there right now? Oh, gosh. All right. Well, let's hope we can all get out of here afterwards. So it's really great to be here. And it's great to be here, especially with Ali Rezai, who is a guy who I've known for a few years now. He has been breaking all kinds of barriers, blood-brain and otherwise. And he is a leader in the world of engineered medicine, neuromodulation. He comes to us from the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute at West Virginia University. He has 54 patents to his name. And I think you'll agree, Barack Obama doppelganger, right? What do you think? Potential stand-in to play him in the movies? So let's get a little background on him, Barack. I mean, Ali. You were born in Iran, came to Los Angeles at the age of 10. Just give us a little background on what brought you to medicine in general, and then the brain in particular.
Yeah, so when I was at UCLA as an undergraduate, it was in the 80s, and that was the start of the AIDS crisis. So I became very interested in immunology research, and I was very fortunate to obtain a position in the laboratory of some of the world leaders in immunology that were trying to find out what's going on with this virus or condition that's killing so many people. So that really started my interest in medicine, and then I went to University of Southern California from my medical school, and there I was fascinated by the brain, but also I was surprised at how much we don't know about the function of the human brain and how much there are so many conditions that we can't help. And I remember one specific situation where I was a medical student rotating on the neurosurgery service. And there was a young man, a college student at USC, who was hit by a car, had a massive brain hemorrhage, and was in a coma. Came in, and we performed life-saving surgery to save his life. But what was profound was that we could not help him afterwards, despite saving his life. And the best technology, we could not help his disability from cognition, emotional, and physical disability. And that really was a very important point for me to see how much we need to work on neurological disorders. And that led me to go into neuroscience and neurosurgery.
Well, we've come a long way, haven't we? We know a lot more, but there's still a lot more to know. Let's talk a little bit about the history, though, of engineering, bioengineering. Best I can tell, that's the oldest piece of bioengineering ever. It's a 3,000-year-old wooden toe found on an Egyptian mummy. And then you fast forward a little bit, we can get into the pacemaker, the heart pacemaker, the cochlear implant, Barney Clark's artificial heart. but you get the sense that we are living in an age where things are speeding up quickly. Tell us about what it's like being in this field right now.
Well, I mean, this human ingenuity has really driven innovations, and coupling it with technology, all the ideas have been around for decades and centuries, but technology enables the ideas. So, for example, the Romans and the Egyptians were using the torpedo fish, a fish ray species, to put them on the foot to treat gout and chronic pain. And so we've come a long way, but the humans have always come up with ideas, but technology enables these ideas. So there's an exciting time coming up right now for new innovations and applications.
When you look at the big picture of bioengineering right now, what's the exciting stuff? What's going on right now that has researchers really active?
I think digitization of medicine is a big area that has impact on every aspect of medicine, characterizing condition, diagnosing, predictive analytics, wearable technology, and sensors. And that's going to transform the way patients are managed and treated. And also, particularly, the way we can deliver targeted delivery of medications, or electrical targeted delivery with pacemakers of the nervous system, for example, ultrasound targeted delivery using ultrasound fields to treat diseases, and magnetic fields. So a lot of activity is going on. This is all engineering advances that are being coupled to healthcare workers to advance how we can help patients.
And we're talking about helping things like spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, opioid addiction, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. It really runs the full gamut of medicine. So let's begin with how I met you and an individual who I admire very greatly. His name is Ian Burkhart, and it was this Nature paper which led me to you and the story of Ian. So first of all, just give us the backstory on this remarkable young man.
Ian is just an amazing young man, and sadly at age 19, he had a life-altering accident where he was with his friends diving into the water, having fun, and he went to a shallow sandbar and broke his neck and became quadriplegic. And he's one of the most amazing people I've met. He's a glass half full person, and he wants to have the full life force in terms of helping others and helping himself, and he's really a very remarkable young man. So he volunteered for our study, and this was a collaboration between engineers at Battelle and our team when we were at Ohio State University, neurologists, neurosurgeons, rehab specialists. And what we did is we implanted here, you can see in his head, there's a microchip the size of a pencil head that is implanted in the motor cortex. That's the part of the brain that controls your hand movements. And remember, he could not move his arms or legs, he's quadriplegic. And this is connected to a chamber outside that it goes to a decoding software here. And as Ian is thinking about movements, this signal processing is decoding those thoughts into action and linking it to the sleeve here and enabling the sleeve to contract to cause his hands to move. So using his thoughts to move his hands.
Now, this is a special piece of video. This is not put on for the cameras. This is actually the first time he ever used it. And there you are in this room. And yeah, I love the look at his face, for one thing.
Yeah,
what was it like being there, seeing him have this movement in his wrist?
His face speaks it all. I mean, it's the first time a human was able to use his thoughts to move their own hands. And this was a remarkable achievement of partnership of 2 years of hard work of engineers, scientists, healthcare workers. And there he is for the first time. He's able to move his own hands as somebody who's become quadriplegic from an injury. And for our team, it was very gratifying and amazing, an moment, that surreal moment for us that watch Ian move his hands. But then right away after that, we said we have so much more work to do. So let's sit down with the engineers and colleagues and see how we can improve. Just a little flexion of the hand is good, but that's not functional enough.
So let's look at some of the progress. We've got another video here, and it's going to start off, it'll say 1 year ago, but this is actually starting in 2014. So the video's a little bit old. But look at, this is basically what you saw on that first day. And then over time, he gets better and the device gets better, right? Watch what happens.
And you can see what happens is from a small flicker of the fingers, he's now able to do more precise movements. There's plasticity and machine learning going with the device and with Ian's brain with plasticity. So as he's thinking, he can do multiple movements, take a credit card out of a wallet and swipe it.
That's very remarkable. That takes a lot of dexterity to do that. It's worth pointing out, yes, he doesn't really have feeling, right? I mean, he's doing that without feeling.
That's right, and he's got no movement. So this is he's using his thoughts, with brain-computer interface. Those thoughts are being decoded and recoded to a sleeve, a prosthetic sleeve that allows him to move his fingers and hands on demand. And he's becoming more active. He can do many, many movements over time, so this is getting better and better.
All right, so if you're a 20-something American male, pouring dice into a jar is fine, but really what you're about to see here is a little more important. Guitar Hero. This is Dream On. But the fact that he can move his fingers like that, that's significant, isn't it?
It really is. And I think, you know, in the beginning, just a little movement of the wrist and evolution with machine learning, artificial intelligence, signal processing, he can play Guitar Hero. That's important. So maybe as someone who is disabled, taking a cup to your mouth is important, of course, or brushing your teeth. But you need to also do activities, hobbies. For younger individuals and others want to do hobbies, do gaming. So it's very important for us to be able to have Ian to do this. And he's a remarkable man. There he is playing Guitar Hero, better than me.
He's still working with you.
Yes.
He still has the implant, and he's still doing his thing. So let's talk about where this technology goes. Now, this is a kind of an easier-to-use sleeve, right? That's what you see ahead?
Correct. These wearables that are studded with electrodes, and they're linked to brain signals. So your thoughts are being linked to movements of arms and legs. And there's been recent studies also, people who are paraplegic, they can just get up and walk with stimulation. So this technology is transforming the way people with disabilities are functioning, and this is really as a result of engineers working closely together with healthcare workers to advance this field to help those with brain injuries, like traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injuries, stroke, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
A couple more words on TBI. How would this help somebody with a traumatic brain injury in a similar fashion?
Sure. If somebody has got a traumatic brain injury, they cannot move their arms or legs, so this can help the movements which can be affected by a severe brain injury.
All right, so we met a couple of researchers here at Purdue who have spent the last 10 years delving into this area of traumatic brain injuries, in particular caused by collision sports, especially football. And their work has led to an innovative design idea for helmets. So far, the idea has not been embraced by industry, by the leagues, and by the helmet makers. But that doesn't stop these guys from, shall we say, pounding away at the problem.
In Eric Naumann's lab, they are hard on helmets, literally and rhetorically.
The technology kind of stagnated around the 70s. It helps prevent skull fractures, it helps prevent the really serious traumas, but they don't absorb much energy.
And that's a big problem, but it's not an easy one to tackle.
Which of those hits are making a difference and how many hits are causing a concussion at the end of the day?
That's Eric's collaborator, Tom Talavage. Together, they fielded a decade-long study of 460 high school athletes playing football and other collision-based sports. Before the season, they scanned their brains in a functional MRI while giving them a cognitive test. They had them play with a tiny accelerometer and gyroscope attached behind their ears. And then at the end of the season, another MRI and cognitive test. The results? Myth-busting.
So this is them before the season begins, and then on the right-hand side of the slide, we have our athletes at a later point in the season.
Red indicates areas where the brain is more active. This player endured 240 hits to the head, at least 10 times the force of gravity, but never had a concussion. The conventional wisdom? His brain was healthy. This one had fewer hits, but did have a concussion. But their postseason scans looked the same, both equally injured.
So at the end of the day, yes, one of them had symptoms, but both of them, their brains for both players are telling us that they are not functioning well. That was quite profound. When we saw this, that was when we said, wow. The structure of the brain changes a little bit with every hit. The physiology changes a little bit with every hit.
Their solution? A better helmet lined with this squishy material.
This thing can compress all the way down to 90% and still keep absorbing more and more energy all the way. Very simple, but it's basically made out of silicone.
So far, helmet makers, teams, and leagues have not embraced the new design.
Most of these companies are like big tobacco in the sense that they know there's probably a problem, but they don't want to run the risk of having been held liable for previous problems that have arisen from participation.
For engineers who have built a better mousetrap, there's nothing more frustrating than that.
It is utterly ridiculous. Like, we can engineer the shit out of all this. There's no doubt in my mind.
That's Eric's Matt Damon moment there. So, all right, so Ali, what advice do you give researchers like these guys who, 10 years, they've got a good idea. It's hard to get some of these ideas out of the lab and get it into the real world. What advice do you give people when they're frustrated by that?
Yeah, and these guys have done tremendous work. I've been so impressed the past 24 hours here meeting the researchers here, really world-class researchers, very impressive work. So congratulations to this esteemed university for their faculty and students. So I think this is a remarkable study where they've done, in terms of looking at high school football players, this large study, and they've shown that there's structural and functional changes in the brain as a result of brain injuries. And that's an important point to show on imaging as well as presentation clinically. And they've gone further to how to prevent this or minimize this by developing this new technology. And I think this needs to be deployed in new studies and research where we can put this in the field more. And that's important because we need to solve this concussion problem, brain injury, so people can play sports, enjoy sports, but also be safe. So they need to really get this to the next level, and they need more partnerships and acceptance by others. Great work.
So another thing they were talking about was this idea that they have scans which give an unusual baseline. They have before, during, and after an injury. And that might have some help, that might help you in other realms of brain injuries and diseases. How can that help, having that baseline data?
It's indeed, that's very important, and that's why this is a very important study, really a tour de force to do this study. And you're able to see structural and physiological and functional changes, and you're able to follow them at baseline, before and after interventions or treatments. So you can do this for Alzheimer's, for example, or Parkinson's, or other neurological disorders. So this is a very nice model study that they've done, and I think that they need to take their work to the next level now. Great study.
All right, so let's continue on the subject of brain implants, and we'll talk about Parkinson's here. And we talked about spinal cord injuries. But these implants, these pacemakers, which you see the schematic there, first of all, give us a 101 on how this works.
Sure, and this is called deep brain stimulation, but it's really a brain pacemaker. So the engineers have taken heart pacemaker technology that's universal, helping people with heart disease, and instead of the wires going into the heart, they're going to the brain. So similar technology adapted for the brain. You can see here how the signals are going up to different parts of the brain. Somebody who's got a tremor from Parkinson's is a part of the brain that is electrically malfunctioning or misfiring. So these are calming signals that restore the tremor or calm the tremor, or deal with the anxiety, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder, or calm the electrical storm in the brain from epilepsy. So this technology is FDA approved and Medicare reimbursed for epilepsy, obsessive compulsive disorder, Parkinson's, tremor, and dystonia, once these patients have failed initial approach to medications.
Well, the proof is in the video. Let's watch the video. This is before and after. This is a person who's afflicted with Parkinson's. And we brought the snowy winter one for you so you'd feel at home with this. And his affliction, he has the on-off switch on. If we can play that video, Susie. There we go. So on the left side there, he's got the implant, but it's off.
Yes.
All right, so look at how debilitated he is. And in a second, you're going to see what happens when he turns it on. So is it literally that easy? It's almost instantaneous as the thing comes on?
It is. When it comes on, the signals go into the brain and shut down the abnormal electrical activity in the brain. And you can see now his tremor is gone, his stiffness is improved, his rigidity improves. He's able to have more control of his movements versus Parkinson's controlling him. And over time, you reduce the medications. So this technology has made a remarkable impact in those with Parkinson's for those who meet the criteria for surgery.
He's able to shovel back the vortex right there. So yes. But I got to say, when I see this video, I hesitate. I don't like when we use the term miraculous, because that, to me, sells short the good work of science. But it's hard to come up with a better term when you see that kind of outcome. What's it like doing a surgery like that and seeing that kind of outcome?
It's extremely gratifying for the team, and it's not just me as the neurosurgeon, the neurologist, the nursing staff, many others, but I think most importantly for the patient who's been suffering with having the shaking and tremors that makes them not be able to take cup of coffee to their hand, to their face and eat, or they don't go out and eat with their families and cannot button their shirts. So this gives them their life and quality of life back to the patient and the family. So it's remarkable technology. Again, another example of engineers have been able to improve healthcare by partnering with healthcare workers.
All right, let's talk about something a little less invasive, focused ultrasound. This is a very exciting field right now, and we've got a few things to talk about here. And, you know, when I think of ultrasound, I think, is it a boy or is it a girl? But there's more to it than that. It'll blast kidney stones, we all know that, but there's also some very interesting ways. Well, it's really dramatic because it's breaking the blood-brain barrier. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go along here. But first of all, show us how it works, the machine works, and how you're able to focus ultrasound to a specific part of the brain.
So the patient lies in an MRI machine, and a helmet comes over your head, and this is not surgery, so it's 1,000 ultrasound probes in a helmet that are converging, traveling to the scalp, to the skull, to the brain, to a precise area identified in MRI and delivering the energy. So you can use a high-intensity ultrasound to make a little lesion or stop the tremor, as it is done for this case that you can see, or you can use low-intensity, a smaller frequency of ultrasound to open up the blood-brain barrier or do neuromodulation. This technology is really, in my opinion, transforming the way we're treating neurological disorders with ultrasound waves. And ultrasound is no longer just looking at the heart or looking at a wound for obstetrics. Is being applied for many, many treatment applications.
So how do you decide how to target? Is it just based on the MRI data and you just dial it in?
Exactly. As you can see in this image, you target the area for tremor, that area that, for example, you put a pacemaker, like we did in the previous slide. Instead, you converge all these ultrasound waves, 1,000 ultrasound beams converging to that precise pinpoint area that's causing the tremor of Parkinson's and hence stopping the tremor.
All right, so let's show another video now. This is a person who has essential tremors. It says surgery here. By the way, we're talking about procedure, not surgery,
right,
because it's not invasive. These are his tremors before having this ultrasound.
Right, you can see here, that's the tremor before and after the procedure. This is delivering ultrasound waves. There we go. So right away, immediately as you deliver the ultrasound energy, the tremor stops and patients go home. So this is how this technology, this is FDA approved now for the treatment of tremor. So this is not doing surgery, but delivering ultrasound via an MRI and helmet. And that's why I think this technology has a lot of potential and we need to do more research in this regard.
So it's early days, obviously. Do we know how long that lasts and how often a person might have to come back to get that kind of effect?
A great question. At this point, most patients are fine with just one treatment, but some may require additional treatments.
All right, so let's get a little more into the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
This is the Chuck Yeager of neuroscience, breaking the barriers. There's the sound barrier and there's the blood-brain barrier. Yeah. I'm going to get a chance to meet one of your subjects soon, but I want to know a little more about the blood-brain barrier and how it works. Walk us through this.
So what happens, blood-brain barrier is in all of us. It's a barrier that allows nutrition and other nutrients go back and forth or waste, but it prevents germs, harmful substances to get in. So it's a shield. But the problem is that in addition to allowing nutrients to get in and waste to get out, it prevents chemotherapy agents, large drugs, pharmaceuticals, antibodies, stem cells, and gene therapy to get in. So it's a big problem. And opening up the blood-brain barrier has been a major issue in neuroscience. So now you can couple the blood-brain barrier opening. What you do is you create a leak in the blood-brain barrier temporarily and to deliver medications, to deliver gene therapy, stem cells. What we do is inject microbubbles, microscopic bubbles, intravenously. They travel through your bloodstream, and then when they go into the brain, we target the area that we want in the brain with a low-tuned ultrasound. And what that does, it makes these bubbles oscillate, and that opens up the tight junctions temporarily and opens up the blood-brain barrier. And this is now being tested with ALS, being tested with brain tumors to allow chemotherapy to get into the brain, and is being tested with Alzheimer's. So typically chemotherapy, 10 to 15% gets into the brain. Now imagine if you can open up the blood-brain barrier and have 50% get in. Wow. So that speaks in terms of potential for this. Very exciting technology.
So in a couple weeks, I'm going to come to West Virginia, and I'm going to meet the second member of your cohort there, Judy, who is a ICU nurse, an RN, PhD. She knows a lot about medicine. I haven't met her yet, but I've seen her brain. There it is. And first of all, why don't you tell me about her brain and where do you got, as a trained eye, where is the Alzheimer's in that brain?
So these are MRI scans that are overlaid with PET scans. PET scans for beta amyloid. These are protein clumps that happen in Alzheimer's patients. And the brain gets clogged up with this protein and prevents the transmission of neuronal signals electrically and chemically. So here's an area called the hippocampus. That's the memory centers in the brain for new memory formation that's devastated in Alzheimer's. And within hippocampus, you can see the bright color indicates plaque. So this is an area in the memory part of the brain that has a very high plaque load. So we targeted this area, you can see from top of the brain down here, and that's the eye right there. And these are the two targets that were used to open up the blood-brain barrier.
All right, and let's see the images that you can see the before and after and evidence that you did get through. Tell me what you're seeing here.
So what happens, sonication, is when you sonicate or deliver the ultrasound energy here. And in this case, you can see before, and that's the hippocampus, the memory center. And as you open the blood-brain barrier, it becomes leaky, and there it is. That's a contrast agent going into the hippocampus, and then 24 hours later, it goes away. So here's an example of being able to safely and reproducibly open up the blood-brain barrier and then allow it to close. And this provides a lot of opportunities in animal studies. It's been shown that the plaques are cleared in Alzheimer's patients and in Alzheimer's animal models rather, and the memory decline is lessened. So this is an exciting area. It's the clinical trial. We have to do more research, but it's a very exciting opportunity for us at this point.
So once again, very early days, but do you have any anecdotal information that would lead you to believe it's working?
Well, I think we are able to open up the blood-brain barrier, so we achieved that, and I think we need more time because Alzheimer's is a progressive condition. But what's also very exciting is now we can couple this technology to targeted drug delivery, chemotherapy delivery for tumors, targeted antibodies, stem cells, or gene therapies. So no longer the brain is privileged in terms of we can't get these treatments into the brain. Now we can get many of these treatments targeted into the brain. So many of the studies, for example, Alzheimer's studies, use a very high concentration of antibodies. Only a small fraction gets into the brain. So potentially this can open up a whole way of treating brain disorders.
We're just getting started here. It really is kind of an ultrasound revolution. And I saw some more evidence of it when I went into a lab here at Purdue. Rahim Rahimi is using ultrasound devices to do a few things. First of all, it can actually power a device that is implanted in the body. He's also working with an idea of implanting LEDs inside the body, and the LEDs would light up a specific area. The drug itself would be light sensitive, so you'd have a very targeted use of a drug, say of chemotherapy for a cancer tumor, that kind of thing. But Rahim is a lot like this guy. He's got a lot of irons in the fire, and he's been also looking at some other ways to improve healthcare and looking at some things that frankly have been overlooked for really about a century and need some improvement. In Rahim Rahimi's lab, they are connecting state-of-the-art electronics to the world of medicine.
The future of electronics is actually in the field of medicine.
You can connect an electrode.
But there is a gap. Medicine is slow to embrace new technology. After all, lives are on the line. And this LED is being lit by virtue of ultrasound vibrations.
Exactly. Although our devices and smartphones and everything has become smarter and more intelligent, this sector hasn't changed that much.
So there is a lot of room for improvement.
They didn't bond very well. You have
Take the humble bandage, for example.
These orange spots that you're seeing, these are oxygen-sensitive dyes. So when it's in contact with the wound, the fluorescent kind of property of these patches will change.
If the dye fluorescence indicates a lack of oxygen, the smart bandage pumps in some hydrogen peroxide.
The mechanical design is fine.
They are also hoping to measure bacteria. This film is made of a sugar that bacteria like to eat.
As the film starts degrading, so there's less film, there's a decrease in the resistance.
The more they eat, the easier it is for electricity to flow through, and that can signal the need for antibiotics.
Instead of having like a continuous release of antibiotics, we have a system that it delivers the antibiotics as needed.
It sounds costly, but chronic wound care is already a multi-billion-dollar problem. Rahim is being thrifty by printing the sensors and microchannels on patches to deliver the medications. The attached electronics would be reusable.
We estimated that the patches will cost a few cents. Actually, the entire material that we're using in the process will be less than $1. So this unit, that's the whole goal. It's not supposed to make it practical. At the end, we have not a fancy device, but something that then could be translational.
Now, I know you had a chance to visit his lab today, and he's got a lot going on. Going back to that ultrasound idea, I think of that idea of, kind of having these LED lights. It's like a laser-guided bomb for delivering medicines. You couple this with what's going on in the world of genetics, and you really get into a very precision and personalization of medicine that was inconceivable just a short time ago.
Exactly, and in the lab this morning, we were amazed, and we didn't want to leave the lab because we came up with so many ideas together, and that's fantastic. And like you said, being able to, this digitizing of medicine, where you're looking at individuals' genetic background, looking at their physiological signatures, cognitive, other biomarkers, immune, inflammatory biomarkers, and linking it to the clinical state. This, in my opinion, will have a significant impact for the future of how we practice medicine. And this technology, as Rahim was talking about this morning, with these wearable patches or sensors, will have a major impact. And the ultrasound technology is phenomenal. They're using ultrasound to activate light therapy and activate electrical therapy. So this ultrasound is everywhere now. But now we have the technological capabilities to get outcomes, which is important.
So ultrasound is not the only uninvasive way to take care of issues related to the brain. Now, what you're seeing here is transcranial magnetic stimulation. And in this context, the idea is to use it to help opioid addicts. And I'm curious, first of all, what is the appropriate case for transcranial magnetic stimulation versus, say, ultrasound versus, say, an implant? Why would you use it?
So I think in terms of research needs to be done much more, so depending on the form of energy, light energy, magnetic energy, ultrasound energy, or electrical. So this technology of transcranial magnetic stimulation is now FDA approved for those with depression, where they come in and they get magnetic treatment to help their severe depression. And it's an engineering achievement where it sends these magnetic waves into the brain and goes, for example, on the surface of the brain here. This is a model of the brain. Here, I'm holding the side here. So
never leave home without it, right? This is a guy who travels with a couple brains, right?
The couple brains, so it's half the brain here. So what happens, this magnetic technology sends magnetic waves to the brain, different parts of the brain and surface, and can activate the neurons, can activate the brain. In this case, it can activate some of the prefrontal areas to help with depression, and is now being used as well for opioid addiction and other applications.
Why don't you walk us through addiction as the brain views it? How does it work, and how can you intervene?
Great. So with addiction, basically, to be very simple, there are two parts of the brain that are contributing to addiction. So there's a primitive part of the brain down in the base. This is an evolutionary, very primitive part of the brain involved in reward seeking, in cravings, and this part becomes very active in addicts. And whether you're an alcohol, drug, opioid addicts, gambling addicts. So this is the area.
Is the reptile brain, the limbic brain, right? Yeah.
Exactly, and that is on fire, pushing you to seek drugs. And then the cortex, the surface of the brain, this is your executive function, your cognitive control. So the top of the brain, the cortex, sends inhibitory signals down deep in the brain to block the primitive areas. So there's a balance between the top-down inhibition and control and bottom-up activation. And that's the balance that has to be achieved. We all have urges that we suppress and control, but if it gets out of control, the top-down approach, the top of the brain is not controlling the bottom, and that leads to addiction in a simplistic way.
So that's why you call this approach top-down, because it takes care of the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain. And what does it do? It just kind of gives it a little push to make it do a little more work? How does it do it?
It's believed that the theory is that it activates the cognitive centers more, so you're more in charge of your emotions and more you're in charge of your impulsivity. So this activates the cognitive centers, the executive centers of the brain.
All right, so you can go bottom up as well, and in this case, what we're looking at here is something a little more drastic. This is actual implants, which stimulate the lower quadrants that he was talking about of the brain. And this is very new stuff.
Right.
First of all, I'm going to assume that somebody has to be in a pretty bad state before you do this. Walk us through who this would be appropriate for, and what do we know so far about whether this might work?
So this is, as you said, these are for those who have failed everything, opioid addicts and alcoholics, and opioid addicts who have basically have failed all treatments, have had multiple overdose situations, and have had severe disability. There's nothing else we can do for them. It's a life-threatening condition, opioid addiction. So in this case, this is a grant that we have with the National Institute of Drug Abuse, where we've been given permission to put a pacemaker in the brain, and this is now under review by the FDA, to put, this is a pacemaker device right here, I forgot to show you earlier. But this is putting pacemakers, as you can see in this image right there, and that's the pacemaker wire, and going down in the bottom part of the brain to decrease the activity of this part of the brain to reduce the cravings. And that's a hypothesis. And in Germany and other centers across the world, they're doing it for severe alcoholism and other addictions, where they can use pacemakers in the brain to regulate these reward centers. It's early on, though.
And again, we can't say for certain this works, but is there any promising data yet?
There's a lot of research, animal research, and physiology research that shows this area is super active. So if we can suppress it, I think there's an opportunity. But all we know is some of the German and other groups have looked at improvements in alcoholics and other addicts. So we're hopeful about this technology.
I got to say, when you look at the opioid epidemic in this country, it's easy to get depressed very quickly, but it's nice to see a lot of these engineering solutions out there because, after all, it's the pharmacological solutions that got people in trouble in the first place. Here at Purdue, Jackie Linus has a very active lab, and she's looking at ways to help addicts in treatment and in recovery better understand, keep better diaries, understand when and how their cravings are triggered.
I love this field. I'm always excited to come to work and work on the projects we do. It could be something like a continuous glucose monitor.
Biochemical engineer Jackie Linus sits right at the intersection of medicine and engineering.
I try and work on devices that I think will actually make it out into the world. I like doing research and I like making widgets, but they don't do anybody any good sitting in my lab.
Right now, the widget she is focused on is this patch that sticks to the skin like a temporary tattoo. The goal? Improve treatment for people addicted to opioids and other drugs.
If somebody has taken cocaine, it can also be excreted in the sweat.
The patch contains 2 electrodes, a tiny battery, and strands of synthetic DNA.
The DNA, when it sees cocaine, actually folds over around it.
That completes the circuit on the patch.
This is one of the electrodes,
which confirms a positive result for the drug.
This includes Bluetooth.
The device could help an addict identify times, places, and triggering events for relapses.
So here we're seeing different oxidation reduction reactions.
Our goal is to help them identify that difference between the craving and succumbing to a craving and pinpoint that time point.
So as you can see with my heart rate,
she and her team are also working on a smart watch that monitors respiration, a way to trigger an alarm in the case of an opioid overdose.
Here we have my respiratory pattern, so this is me breathing in and out.
I think there's a lot of interest in leveraging technology. Technology is changing medicine, and I think that it's something that engineers can bring to the table from many points of view.
So what you see here is such an interesting convergence. You've got a revolution in the miniaturization of sensors. You've got cloud computing. You've got machine learning and artificial intelligence. When you put all that together, suddenly medicine looks very different, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does. I mean, just our lives are digital right now, but that technology is governing all aspects of our lives, but it needs to be deployed in medicine. So if you can detect an addict who is overdosing or having addictive features or increased cravings, that's very, very huge. And I'm very impressed by the passion and the dedication and the enthusiasm of this team here. So that's why we need engineers and scientists who are motivated to make a difference. Now you link those with clinicians, and then you can come up with some good solutions. So I think the digitization of medicine, digital care, digital diagnosis is very important. That needs to be deployed quickly in medicine.
So what people often think about when we talk about this, of course, are the privacy concerns. And And how is Mark Zuckerberg going to make money off my health information, right? So how do we guard against that and still get the benefits of all this?
That's a great question, and I think we need to be ahead of it. So sadly, at times these days, the digital revolution, the basic mechanism of control has not been put in it in terms of the ethics, and also not being partnering, the regulatory agencies and others not work together. So I think in medicine, we need to partner between the inventors, between the scientists, between the companies developing this technology and regulators, and stay ahead of it. But we do need the data. So the data is very important because that's going to help advance healthcare and advanced diagnosis of conditions. So it has to be a responsible way where everybody's working together and staying ahead of it instead of chasing after it.
Are you reasonably optimistic we can thread that needle? Does it require legislation? Is it, what will it take to ensure that all works out the way we envision it?
I think responsible collaborations are very important. And for everybody to be looking at the privacy issues are paramount, so medicine. So patient HIPAA compliance, privacy are very important. So every device used on patients, and for that matter for all of us, to monitor us needs to have a very robust privacy framework, and that needs to be paid attention more upfront instead of afterwards.
Okay, when I did a story a year or so ago for the NewsHour on the opioid addiction problem, I talked to leading scientists all over the country, and I asked every one of them, what is the pain relief alternative to opioids? And nobody really had a good answer beyond, yoga and meditation, essentially. But there are some ways that you can kind of combine pharmacology and the engineering we've been talking about to come up with some alternatives. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on here.
So this is a new technology where basically you want to, with opioid addiction, the very first time you take an opioid, if you take an opioid for 1 day, after 1 year, there's a 6% chance that you're still taking it. These are very addictive
6% after that's a very risky pill, isn't it?
It is, and the brain chemistry changes with the first dose. And so that's important. So it's important for us to find solutions that are not requiring opioids. Here's an example, and these are the micro pellets that are the size of a small grain of rice, smaller than that. And this is the pellets here, Miles, you can see. And wow. You can't see it here, but these pellets are a PLA, polylactic acid polymer, that has embedded within it a drug called clonidine. And this drug, clonidine, is an anti-inflammatory and an analgesic. So this PLA micro pellet is now being injected in the back for those that have sciatica. Sciatica is a condition that affects 5 million people, back and leg pain from herniated disc, very disabling. A lot of people take opioids. And with this technology, the goal is to deliver this targeted medication for pain and anti-inflammation to the nerves, and it's an extended release, slowly dissolves without the systemic need for medications, and treats the pain. And it's the clinical trial that's underway with this targeted micropellet injection.
So I imagine there are all kinds of therapies, medicines that systemically are a bad idea, but if you could keep it specific, of course we think of chemotherapy for one thing, right? Yeah. If you can make it specific, target it, it changes everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that's what the revolution is going to be in the future for medicine, working with engineers and pharmacists and the Drug Discovery Institute here and others to develop targeted delivery. Medications are effective, but you need to deliver them to the area of need in a targeted fashion, in a local fashion, instead of a systemic fashion.
So engineering is not going to replace drugs. This is just another tool in the toolbox?
Correct, to allow you to get there more precisely to the local area.
All right, so after we play this next film, I'm going to come out into the audience. I know you have some questions, and we'll do some questions, so be ready with those. But this idea of alternative to chemicals, that's a big driving force in Pedro Irizarry's lab. He is focused, among other things, on a non-pharmacological, non-surgical way to treat something that afflicts a lot of people, glaucoma. Pedro Irizarry wanted to be a doctor when he was young. Then chemistry and biology got in the way, but he always liked making things. So maybe he was born to be a biomedical engineer.
It's really exciting time to be in this field. It's like the Wild West. In biomedical engineering, nothing's been done.
His lab is as busy as a gold rush town. Students at all levels working on an array of implants that could help prevent sudden death for people with epilepsy,
allow amputees to more precisely control prosthetic limbs, and treat glaucoma using these rad-looking glasses.
It's kind of like something Elton John would have worn in the 70s.
Along with these contact lenses laced with gold. I told you there was a gold rush. The glasses create a tiny electromagnetic field.
It's just a coil. There's nothing else here.
And the gold picks up the wireless energy. How does this help people with glaucoma? Well, they have clogged eye ducts, stopping the crucial flow of fluid. Energized by the glasses, the golden contacts deliver tiny amounts of current to stimulate muscles that control the eye's faucet and drain.
This generates the magnetic field that the contact lens picks up. We can open up the drain with a current to contract the muscle, and what we see is the same effect in a human eye that you would get after several months of eye drops, but we get it in 15 minutes with no side effects.
Human trials are underway in Spain, and so far, seeing is believing.
The first time we ever did it in a human, the ophthalmologist and the optometrist were literally hopping around the room.
Pedro's brain is hopping.
Makes the whole implant smaller.
With tons of other engineering solutions to medical problems.
The goal is to keep you functioning like a 20-year-old. That's the goal, quality.
But he wonders, why stop there?
Why not give you vision you never had? If I'm going to give you hearing, why not improve upon your hearing? If I'm going to pace your heart, why not make your heart stronger? I mean, with everything that we do, why do we have this boundary? And I think it's because we're afraid of where it might lead us, but the answer isn't to just slam the door shut and not explore that.
All right, that opens up a can of worms, don't you think? Superhumans, what are your thoughts on that? Should there be, rules against making us better than God made us?
I think technology is very powerful, so we have to have an ethical and responsible way of deploying the technology, and it should really be focused on improving health, wellness, improving longevity and function, and particularly for all of us, improving our lives and health and wellness, but also for patients who have cognitive disabilities, physical disabilities, or emotional disabilities. So you have to leverage technology in a responsible and ethical way to help people.
But you're kind of ducking it a little bit. If somebody came to you and said, can you make me run faster, jump higher? Or if I said to you, give me a better arm, for the one that's missing, would you do it?
Sure, I think it depends on the context. So for example, we're working to improve the health and wellness of military and athletes, so improve their performance, recovery. So technology can help improve human recovery and function. And also a better arm, it's good for somebody who needs it, and I think technology can help, but again, it's a slippery slope to create superhumans, so I think that's where you have to put the brakes on and work with colleagues and others to understand what is the purpose of this technology.
Next thing you know, we're in Blade Runner, right? Something like that. All right, who has some questions here? I know there's some questions given the provocative nature of all this. Anybody here? I'll come on over, doing my Phil Donahue best here. I guess I'm carbon dating myself by saying Phil Donahue, right? You kids know about Phil Donahue? All right, go ahead, any question?
Sure, so one of my questions is about, you talked a lot about data and how important it is. One of the challenges is finding the best data and using it well. An example of that, I think, is the smartwatches, the EKGs, those sorts of things. It's not at a point right now where if I use my watch, it's going to give a cardiologist level EKG. So when is it effective, when is it not, and when are you basically drowning in a sea of data you can't use?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the key things, as you said, there are so many sensors out there, and I would say probably 90% of them not medical grade, and they're there for your understanding of what's going on, but you need to validate. And that validation is very important. By that means compared to gold standard, a technology to say, does this have the reliability and the precision that you need for an EKG? So I think that needs to happen first. You got to put that the technology in the context of what type of data and in what context that you want to assess it. So I think validation is very important, and get the best data. What's the source of the data? What's the context of the data? And how reliable is that? And that is an important question that needs to be linked to further studies. But 90%, I would say, of these technologies are not medical grade, and that's where it needs to go.
Michelle has a question on the other side.
All right, so Would somebody be able to inject small particles that, when stimulated with an ultrasonic pulse, produce a magnetic field? Could they inject these into the bloodstream, as we have done with the microscopic bubbles? And could these help with stimulating specific parts of the brain on a smaller scale than the machines that are used from outside the body? Could these later, once they have outlived their usefulness, be filtered out through the kidneys, out of the bloodstream?
That's a great question. I think, make sure you file a patent on that, but that's a great question. I think that, exactly, you got to go to smaller and smaller technology. I think take the concepts and do it in models, do it basic models in the laboratory, in vitro, and then apply that in animal models before going to patients. But I think it's fantastic. I mean, this is what we need to do, is targeted delivery, magnetic elements traveling in the bloodstream. When they get the target, you activate them and exert its mode of influence or sense or record. So absolutely, I think this needs to be studied further, and you can sit here on the stage maybe 10 years from now lecturing people about it. So this is fantastic.
Another question back here.
What's your view on changing the genes in baby before they were born?
Yeah.
Oh boy, okay. I don't agree with that. So I think, again, you have to be, the ethics are very important. And again, technology is very powerful. So, and people always, as technology evolves, they use it for proper purposes, but they also abuse it. So in my opinion, that's an abuse of technology. But you need to use technology first and foremost, in my opinion, for helping human disease, and in a responsible fashion.
But there's really no stopping this, is there? Right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think that's been demonstrated.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead. Michelle, go on your side, and then we'll come back over here. Go ahead.
Thanks. And I was really intrigued about your method of opening the blood-brain barrier, because right now one of the things I'm working on is measuring the tight junctions, or the forces between tight junctions, because my collaborator, and I'm the engineer, she's the biologist, is saying that disease actually causes leakage in the blood-brain barrier. Is there a way to close the blood-brain barrier?
It's a fantastic question. So some of the brain tumors, for example, they open up the blood-brain barrier and causes leakage. But on the other side of it is that also chemotherapy does not get into the brain as well. So your question is exactly right. Perhaps, and this is actively being studied also, reverse it and use the technology to close it, a leaky blood-brain barrier, or blood-eye barrier, or in the uterus barrier. So there are many barriers, and I think the important point is that ultrasound technology can have an impact on those endothelial cells, and I think the safety is the most important. So if it can be opened temporarily and closes up again, that's good. So maybe a different frequency or tuning or different set of combinations can actually tighten it. And so great question. I think it's important research, and people have been asking that question. Great question.
Go ahead.
I don't know a lot. I'm very young as well, so bear with me with this. So I remember you had talked a lot about deep brain stimulation with neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc. Is there anything going on with like the viability of that with mental disorder or mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, etc.?
That's a great question. So I showed on this brain here the brain networks or circuits involved in addiction. So there are parts of the brain that are electrically and chemically malfunctioning in depression, in obsessive compulsive disorder, anxieties, and others. So in fact, deep brain stimulation is FDA approved for obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a severe anxiety disorder, but you have to have severe anxiety, and it modulates the anxiety part, the obsession parts of the brain. There's also several clinical trials looking at deep brain stimulation, a brain pacemaker for severe depression. So yes, indeed, we started first with the movement circuits because Parkinson's, you can see the tremor and it stops, but there's tremendous activity looking at behavioral and emotional disorders, but those are much more complicated, so you got to be very careful how you approach that. But for sure, it's being applied for these conditions, no question.
Question here.
So this is like from the standpoint of the general community. So how long would it take for all this technology to reach the public? How long it would take to make this technology accessible to everyone? Because like so far, it seems like all of these are just like privileged to some people. Thank you.
Great question. So let's take an example of the brain pacemaker, this wire. So this brain pacemaker technology now, oh, it fell apart, sorry. It's stuck in the brain. Here we go. So this brain pacemaker.
Don't put that one on me. If you even at discount, I don't want it. Yeah.
So this brain pacemaker technology has been deployed in 170,000 people worldwide, and it is Medicare reimbursed and FDA approved. So this is standard treatment that resulted from engineering innovations. Same thing for ultrasound. It is now FDA approved for tremor. So as we deploy this technology, we have to do the trials. And so the micropellets, the Alzheimer's opening the blood-brain barrier, these are research studies. You have to do controlled studies to show statistically and in a responsible way that you have benefits versus placebo, and then it can be globalized. So that's what these studies have shown. So you have to do careful studies because many things out there may not work. This is research. So while we have the best intentions, it may not work. So that's why it takes a long time. You got to look at safety and benefits or efficacy.
So we have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, question here.
Yeah, hi. So my question is actually along the same sort of lines. I'm really interested in the blood-brain barrier and Alzheimer's research. I'm just curious, do you have any approximation of how long it would take for something like that to go from a clinical trial into something more commercialized? And what is kind of the likelihood of a technology like this eventually being successful? Because I know, especially in Alzheimer's research, it's been a huge amount of technology that has been shut down and hasn't made it farther than clinical trials.
Great question. Alzheimer's is really a problem, right? So 1 in 3 seniors will die with dementia, and the numbers are going to exponentially grow. 500 clinical trials have been done for Alzheimer's. There's nothing out there for Alzheimer's. Billions has been spent. So, and this is going to affect all of us. So 1 in 3 in this audience will have Alzheimer's, sadly. And I think I'm well on my way, actually, sometimes. but you know, that's why you have to do research. So this blood-brain barrier opening is very interesting, and again, it's early on. So first, safety. You got to show that you can open up this barrier safely, and it looks like we can open and close it. Then you do the animal studies that's been done that shows the plaques are clear. So hence why this trial is being investigated. It's a pilot trial. If it's successful and the pilot is safe and shows some benefits, then it's going to be more larger trial. And then in the future, I think there will be time, for sure, in my opinion, where now you couple the blood-brain barrier opening to targeted antibodies, or maybe stem cells, or gene therapy that can get to the area in the brain that it needs to go. So this is why the pace of research needs to be accelerated. And that's why all of you in the audience, you experts here, we need your help to work together with you so we can together battle this Alzheimer's. It's a big problem that we need to deal with. It's going to affect all of us. Many of you are affected by Alzheimer's through a family or friends.
What about the regulators, though? Just a couple words on that. You know, in talking to Pedro Irazoque, he's doing his study in Spain because it's a little harder to deal with the FDA. And one of the points he made, which is really well taken, is they're looking strictly at the possibility that one person might be injured or killed versus the X number of 100 who might benefit. And it seems like that equation is not used by the regulators. Maybe that's not the way they should approach it. I don't know. But do you have the sense that the regulations need to be changed in some fashion?
That's a great question. I think that the FDA is really much better in terms of looking at this. So in my experience in now 25 plus years, FDA is very fast these days, in my opinion, and really allowing us to do studies. For example, the Alzheimer's studies, they approved that in record time, even faster than the Canadian FDA. So, but number one and first and foremost is safety. So these are technologies, we got to deploy them, and you got to make sure safety is number 1, 2, and 3, in my opinion. So if there's a problem, we need to know. So if the safety is reasonable, then you need to push hard to look for benefits. So I think in my experience, FDA is getting much faster in terms of approving initial pilot studies and all that. So I think we're in a much more rapid, progressive FDA now from my perspective.
All right, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so wounding and recovery from wounding really varies even by sex of the individual. Burns are actually, if you give estrogen to men, it will improve the wounds from burns compared to women. When you're looking at the blood-brain barrier and you are actually wounding by opening it up, do you see differences in response to the closure by individuals?
It's a great question. Clinically, we're not seeing changes. So neurologically, the patients are the same. Again, the experience is not a lot. You're talking about maybe 20 patients in the world have had this for brain tumors, Alzheimer's and other conditions, or ALS, for example. But it seems right now that you can open up the blood-brain barrier and you see the contrast dye with an MRI, and then the barrier closes because 24 hours later, the contrast dye is gone. And clinically, the patients are stable. So it remains to be seen. We have to study it more, but so far so good, and I think it's very encouraging.
All right, question here.
So my question concerns this, this notion that healthcare costs are increasing. With all of this new technology, is there a belief that there's a return on investment case to be made, that healthcare costs will go down? If that's the case to be made, then the investment in the research is a down payment towards healthcare cost reduction. Yeah. So that's the first part. The second thing is more a concern. So you brought up this idea that you can track the context in which these cravings happen, et cetera. Do you worry that the insurance companies will get a hold of that and say, well, you caused it, so I'm not going to pay for it?
So those are two great questions. And I think the healthcare cost, as you said, it is very rapidly growing. But I think technology is going to, over time, reduce the healthcare costs. For example, deep brain stimulation, an example of this technology. It's a pacemaker and implant, but studies are showing that patients are reducing their medication intake. Or if you don't require to go to the emergency room or to go to the clinic to get patient medication adjustments, that's helpful. Alzheimer's costs billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. If we can reduce the Alzheimer's burden, that will be hundreds of billions saved. And regarding the insurance companies, some people will take this technology and may use it in a way that may block people's access, and I think that needs to be monitored carefully. But you always hope for people using technology to help individuals, and if we can save an opioid addict, in my opinion, from having an overdose and dying, I think that's helpful, and we have to do everything we can. This is a life-threatening condition, and it's ravaging this country. Where we are in West Virginia is the highest per capita overdose deaths from opioid addicts, followed by Ohio, Pennsylvania, many of this, and Indiana, I'm sure. So this is a big problem that we need to find solutions. These are people's lives, and this is a brain disease. Addiction is a brain disease. So,
all right, question.
So I work with people with Parkinson's disease, and I'm interested in the deep brain stimulation versus using the targeted ultrasound to ablate, and what you see as the value add of the ablation or the negative of the ablation. How do you weigh those technologies?
Great question, and I think that our patients, we offer both technologies. Some patients do not want to have an implant in them, and they say, okay, I'm willing to understand the risks for ablation. Ablation means burning a hole, so it's ultrasound, higher intensity ultrasound, not the low one we use for blood-brain barrier. High intensity, which is 600 kilohertz plus, that makes a lesion. You can get some side effects, for example. You can get some gait problems with that. So the patients say, okay, I don't want to have an implant. I prefer the ultrasound. It's a one-shot treatment, and you're done, if you understand the risks and potential benefits. And also, some people cannot tolerate surgery. Some of the elderly, and they have difficulty, or they may have complications that may not make them a surgical candidate. But we tell each patient, we give them options, and they make their informed decision. So I think it'll be a balance. A lot of patients will still choose deep brain stimulation, but I think increasingly more and more are going to use ultrasound. So it really depends.
We have a question here.
First, I want to thank you many times. I've had deep brain stimulation. I'm a walking miracle. I'm bionic. It gave me my life back in 2016. I couldn't walk, talk, button my shirt. Now I drive, talk, teach, and promote deep brain stimulation. I pray that we would spend more money in research. You cannot put enough money in research take the money we spend for bombs and bullets and build better prescriptions. This is the first version of me. I've got my second computer, second battery. It's a miracle. It costs close to $250,000, but I would give everything I've got to give me my life back. So thank you, Purdue. Thank you for neuroscience. We're just getting on the cutting edge of the neuroplasticity of the brain. We can build new neural paths around the damaged spot. Continue. You cannot spend enough on research. When you talk about a loved one, God's word said, one life is worth more than the whole world. You can't spend too much on research on health.
All right. That's probably the most persuasive argument for spending money on research that I've ever heard, sir. And congratulations on your recovery. And congratulations to those of you who made that possible. All right, question.
Thank you. I was reading the sign behind you. What if we could engineer better health? And then I kept going, but we were afraid to do so. And I was thinking Wright brothers versus NTSB. I mean, imagine if they had to get the permission to do that, to do the flight. I mean, are we not in a similar situation? I mean, you dismissed the genetic modifications, and everybody does, I believe. But the technology is out there. CRISPR is out. I mean, we are not going to stop those things by not accepting them. Do you see a way to somehow experiment in an acceptable way?
It's a great question, and this is an important discussion as technology evolves. But my answer is that we are doing this. So, for example, you got to be. These are human beings. So, first, in my opinion, safety always. But look at Ian, an individual who became quadriplegic and is able to use his thoughts to move his hands. Look at pacemakers, somebody who's got tremor or Parkinson's and can gain their quality of life back. Focused ultrasound. So technology is emerging, or these wearable technologies that can detect and diagnose disease. So my answer to you is that I think we are doing this now, but we need to accelerate the pace. And that's why I call to this audience. You're all the engineering and other experts here. We need your help as clinicians to partner and work with you. And without the partnership and working with you, we could not help Ian or do brain pacemaker or help you or others. So that's very important. It's not just a clinician, it's the neuroscientists, engineers, regulators, everybody. So I think we are trying and making it accomplishments.
Question here.
Hi, so have you ever been involved in or know of any research that bridges the gap between bioengineering and like stem cells? So for example, more efficient ways to differentiate stem cells or coming up with more efficient targeted delivery of stem cells in the body?
I think stem cell research is very important to continue, and that needs to develop more. I think there was a lot of excitement in the previous years that became less, but I think as technology evolves, the stem cells and the restoration will always be there. So I think we're going to get there, but at this point, it's got a long ways to go in research. We've been involved, for example, in gene therapy for Parkinson's studies and others. So I think, again, going back to the beginning, you showed that toe, or the Egyptians and Romans were using the torpedo fish. It's the tools that you have at your disposal, because human ingenuity is always a driver. And personal, you want to help people. But if you don't have the right tools, you can't. So I think those tools will emerge with research that I hope will allow stem cells to become more common use for dealing with neurological stroke, other neurological conditions, and brain damages. So I think it's coming, but at this point, it's got a long ways to go, from my opinion.
Question over here.
What are your thoughts on more basic research on aging? For example, should we consider aging as a disease?
Great question. I wish I had an answer for that aging, but I think aging, obviously there's a genetic element and there's the environmental element on top of that. But fundamentally, there's a lot of people looking at aging as chronic stress on your body and system. So if, we all have stress lives. So if you're chronically stress, and you have chronic sympathetic nervous system, for example, this fight and flight system, if that's chronically, constantly active, it can accelerate the damage to your body organs or accelerate the creation of inflammation. And that's important because I think inflammation over time damages the different organs, and that accelerates the aging process. So you see people who are very stressed, they age faster, perhaps. And I think the aging, you got to characterize what does aging mean? Is it inflammation? Is it chronic stress? Is it genetics? All these factors are interplaying. So all of us, by practicing better heart health, better brain health, taking care of ourselves, better sleep, is one of the most important things, in my opinion, which we all need to improve our brain recovery. So I would say the answer is yes. I think we can increase longevity in human beings we have over time, but we need to understand the drivers that accelerates body damage that can facilitate or hasten aging.
I sure wish I could get more sleep. All right, go ahead.
Me too.
Hi, this question is more on the policy side of your experiences as a researcher. So during your past decades as a researcher, did you ever feel that I could have contributed more in a particular field had there not been policies or regulations as strict as they currently are in that field? And conversely, did you ever feel that, oh, I wonder why there are no policies related to this field or no regulations related to this field?
Yeah, I think those are great questions and outstanding questions in this audience here. I think the policies, many of them have been put in place because perhaps, fundamentally for safety, but also when individuals push a technology or do things in the wrong way, then policy comes in. They have to be rules. So sadly, sometimes people who are abusing things cause problems for everybody else as one element. But I think policy, there needs to be a balance in terms of accelerating medicine. And I think that the balance has to be achieved between getting safety and benefits. And I think safety first, because any one of you who participates in a clinical trial, you want to make sure it's safe for you. And it's durable over the years, within reason. So you really have to look at safety from my perspective. And I think policy is there, and we have to abide by policies, but I think there's evolution occurring in the pilot studies or new innovations in clinical trials. And certainly FDA, I think, is doing their part to accelerate that.
All right, this probably will be our final question. Go ahead.
For the eye contacts, could they ever be used later on for eye doctors and to be able to do at home?
I think so. I think great work. You saw the last video. So eye contacts that are being used to monitor glucose. Eye contacts, in this case, that can be used for glaucoma. So yes, this is in a small ways an implant, right? So you just put your eyes, and those contacts can have a lot of interface. So my answer is yes. Those eye contacts are a tremendous tool that can be used to treat eye disease or to monitor glucose and others. So that's a great question.
All right, future scientists.
Yes,
there.
future scientists.
All right, thank you very much. We've probably got to call it, although I bet we could go on a lot longer. He's got to catch a plane, but really appreciate your great questions and listening to us. And please give Dr. Rezai a warm round of applause for coming to join us.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Drive safely, and hopefully the vortex doesn't get you. But we appreciate you coming out on a cold and snowy night. Take care.
Thank you.